How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. So excited to have you here today and show you this fantastic episode. Just want to say quickly that episodes like this one and all the ones before and the ones in future are made possible by people who subscribe. Hopefully, just like you. I'm going to ask you today if you can leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a rating, leave a like or a comment, and just support the show in the little ways that you can, like that. It makes a huge difference on my end. And quickly, just want to plug as well. I've taken 30 of the best episodes of this podcast and turned them into a fantastic book that goes into 150 secrets to greatness. Each one of those 30 episodes gets crunched down into 5 of the best key takeaways from the whole talk and turns them into a fantastic book. Highly recommend you check it out. Please support the show by grabbing a copy, either a paperback or an ebook. And I can't wait to show you guys this one today. So guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 165 of Talk4, the quickfire podcast where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Skupien. That's me. Let me introduce our incredibly special guest for today. Bryant Cruse is going to be answering our questions today. So, Bryant, I'm super honored. This is a very exciting topic, a very exciting chat, and everything you're doing is phenomenal. So, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Louis. I'm doing fine and pleased to be here and excited for our conversation.
It's going to be really great. So, as I mentioned, first things first, we always like to do this kind of 30 to 60-second elevator pitch right before we get into the show, just to introduce people to who you are. And like I said, I find it hilarious sometimes, people like you who do such complicated and advanced work, trying to fit their mini life story into a minute can be quite a tough challenge sometimes. But if we give you the chance to do that, go on, give us it in a nutshell, just day job, the life of you, and a bit about what you've got going on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to answer the question of what do you do and what you are, because it does seem to be, been a very varied path. There used to be the term, there was a sense of the word career, which meant not some profession that you do, but a journey from place to place to place to place. Careering around the track, as it were. So I've been through a few of those things. I suppose to characterize the way I approached the world back when I was 15, my parents moved from the suburbs out to the country, and I was kind of acculturalized. And I spent a long time walking the routes and woods and realizing I needed a perspective. My perspective was ripped out from under me. I was with different people who thought different ways, and I realized people had a different worldview, and that you lived kind of in the world that was in your mind. And so I got pretty serious about furnishing that up, and it never occurred to me I could go read a book someplace that would give me everything I needed. And I know maybe people do that, but I figured I had to do it myself. And that's what I think led me to go to St. John's College, which is based on the 100 great books of the Western curriculum, starting with the ancient Greeks and going up to modern day sciences. Einstein, you study math and physics and history and all these great books. And one of the things, by the very notion that you're there, is that you get interested in ideas themselves. Not which ideas, although that matters too, but how do you relate the ideas? What is a good idea? What are you going to live by? And how do you recognize a good idea if you trip over it? And ultimately, that brings you to the notion of what is the relationship between our ideas and the world of which they are ideas of. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And as we do, I mean, everybody who goes to that college talks about that kind of stuff for 4 years.
Of course.
And I'll get back, but the interesting thing is, after that 4 years of very, very intense theoretical talking, but not doing, I felt really need to do something practical that I could get my hands on. And after I graduated, I went to Pensacola and became a Naval Aviator, which I did for the next 8 or 9 years, and stayed in the reserves for a total of 20 years. I always kind of look back on that as kind of, if St. John's was my theoretical education, the Navy was the practical part of it. But I always from a very early age, was interested in science and the future. I regard myself as kind of a futurist and always looking forward. From the time my dad took me to see the movie Forbidden Planet when I was 5 years old. And, I'm kind of hooked on space and robotics, but kind of on the periphery. But anyway, after I got out of the Navy, I went back and got a degree in space systems engineering and went into on the mission operations contract at Goddard. Actually, Hubble hadn't been launched yet, but we were getting ready to operate it. So I was in charge of analyzing writing procedures and troubleshooting guides and operational procedures, so all the onboard data management equipment. But I had spent a number of years flying big multi-engine aircraft. And, I flew the C-130, got a couple of thousand hours in that, beautifully laid out cockpit. Everybody goes, look at all these gauges, but they're really logically laid out and you can scan through them and you know exactly what the vehicle is doing and you know exactly what you have to do to keep it safe and flying and going where you have to go. Yes, it requires training, but it's something that a human being could keep up with and really, integrate to the fact that you really felt that, the airplane was almost an extension, of your own senses in your own body. When I walked into the control center for the Hubble, I naturally assumed, my paradigm with operating, it's a remotely piloted vehicle. So I walked in the control center with the attitude of a pilot. But what I saw was a science project. Screens of computers with tabular displays with mnemonics and numbers. Like something like a picture of the CBLT, BLTS, battery 6 voltage, and then a number, 20.2, 20.1, updating 1 to 7. All these stats, 4,000 parameters in the spacecraft. And I thought, if I had to fly an aircraft looking at tables of numbers, I'd be dead. Humans aren't good at keeping up with numbers. I understand how they got that way, because when they first started out, every satellite was a science project. Well, arguably, Hubble is a science project, but that doesn't mean you have to operate it with all that data. You should still give the users a rational interface. And so I kind of conceived of a mission to see if I could revolutionize the way satellites are operated to make them operate more like aircraft. And to me, that was one clear way to do that. You had to get the knowledge that was in my head as a space systems engineer. I knew what the numbers meant, but no human being could keep up with that many numbers in real time. Give me enough time and I can analyze it. I needed the computers to have my knowledge about what those numbers meant and be able to apply that knowledge with the completeness and consistency and speed that only a computer would be capable of. So I saw the problem as getting human knowledge into a computer. And I have ever since then. And at the time, so I dug into the tools that were available at the time, which was what they called expert systems, rule-based systems. AI today is considered synonymous with large language models and machine learning algorithms, statistical stochastic processing. It wasn't always that way. At this time, we had rule-based systems. They called it knowledge-based systems, but that really didn't, from my point of view, as kind of an epistemologist, going back to my undergraduate, it didn't look like knowledge to me. It looked like data strung together with an inference tag. And so, but it was the only game in town. And so I got a tool from Lockheed, and I went home, and after hours, I built the world's first expert system to analyze telemetry dumps from the Hubble onboard computer. And everybody thought that was cool. And as far as I know, that was the first time anybody applied anything that was considered AI to spacecraft operations. Our small but enthusiastic marketing department has been styling me as the father of AI in space because of that. But I did go on after that. I went up to Lockheed AI Center, got what was equivalent to a master's in AI at the time, what was considered AI at the time, and became the driving force behind a project to do the world's first real-time expert system shell that could keep up with real-time telemetry. So that was my first startup. Well, it became my first startup when NASA had already patted us on the back, but nobody was doing anything. So we bailed out and founded a company to do that. That was my first company. And my second one was expert systems didn't scale. So we I left that. That company went on to do middleware. And so my second company looked for a different approach. And that's where we first did find a way to get human knowledge and find a way you could specify an idea in your mind, in this case, an idea about a spacecraft and its systems and subsystems, directly into an intermediate format that a computer can compile and turn that same knowledge into an object structure that the program could process. To me, that was the first time anybody actually created something worthy of the name AI, because I define, going all the way back to my epistemological days, that intelligence is obviously about knowledge. It's a bunch of information processing routines like reasoning or logic or pattern matching that produces an information structure, which is an internal model of the world. And that's exactly what we did then. It was in the mid-90s. Didn't call it AI. Couldn't. There was something called the AI winter. AI was a dirty word because expert systems had failed to scale so badly. So it's my second company. And then my third company is New Sapiens, trying to build on all of the things I've learned. Can we build a common sense model of the world? Can we model any kind of knowledge in the same kind of approach, even subjective, objective, scientific feelings, any concept, any idea that the mind can encompass? Can we put that into a machine?
Wow.
So that's kind of in a nutshell who I am, but I don't know what you call that. Entrepreneur, I guess, works, but
A large nutshell.
you know what I like to call myself? I like to call myself a natural philosopher. That is the term that they used to call a scientist back before science became strongly associated with, the hard sciences and mathematics. But applying philosophical, scientific method, if you will, principles to understanding nature better, which is to say, knowledge, the world.
Interesting. I mean, so like you said, it's a hell of a career path. So Naval Aviator, like you said, the C-130. Wow. I mean, something I've got an opportunity to go flying soon. A lot of my work is around aviation, so I can also say that it's very
I see
cool,
that.
and we can relate there for sure. I'd love to hear more about it. But going from there, obviously AI applications for the Hubble telescope, now New Sapiens. I mean, you've done so much stuff. I'd love to know just a little bit more about you on the personal front then. So if you can walk us through maybe some of the key moments or maybe mentorship or just lessons learned along the way through that career that maybe have shaped your philosophy. And obviously you've done space systems engineering and now you're in AI. Just, obviously you've got a bit of a magic potion there for success because you've done it multiple times in different startups and you've had a great career. So I don't know, tell me about it. What were some of the things that have shaped you and put you onto this trajectory of yours?
Well, there are some certain fundamental principles, practically my mother's knee. I remember the quote from John Muir: when you try to take something out and consider it alone, you find it's connected to everything else in the universe. And, that has certainly um, led me to constantly be putting ideas together. I just don't feel that it's okay to know a little bit about this and know a little about that. In the kind of work we do at New Sapiens, when we are synthesizing knowledge, we use the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. And so you want to put all the pieces together until you can see the whole big picture. And that picture, that jigsaw puzzle, is your world model. That's the world you live in. But again, some cool insights that really brought that home to me. When I was at St. John's and we were studying the ancient world and the philosophy, and I was struck by, the Ptolemaic system, which had the Earth at the center and the stars and the sun and the moon all going around on perfect spheres in regular circular motion. And you go, how quaint. But it worked for a whole lot of stuff. You could use it to calculate the exact size of the Earth. You could use it to navigate a ship around the surface of the Earth. You could predict the seasons. You knew when to plant. And yet this is a model. It was a scientific model because it was based on the observations, and they had a hypothesis, and they tested the hypothesis and measured things and came up with a theory, a model of the world. And then Newton came along and completely upended it and said, no, it's not about regular circular motion. That makes sense. It's about force at a distance and gravity, which makes the sun has to be at the center and things are going around them in ellipse and there's forces. And it was you could still calculate the size of the Earth and do the other things you could do. But you could do more. The same model also could explain the orbit of the moon and the trajectory of a thrown apple. So, oh, it's a better, more powerful model. Does that mean it's right and Ptolemy is wrong? Yeah, maybe it's a better model, superseded the other model. We all laugh at the idea of the Earth being at the center, as we should. But when I was flying C-130s, we had this marvelously Newtonian device. This was before GPS. And it was called an inertial navigation system, originally designed for submarines, but they shrunk it down. You could put it in a C-130. It was very Newtonian, had accelerometers, and it had gyroscopes in a gyrostabilized form. And based on your starting point, your acceleration, it could backtrack double differential back to displacement, give you a run out of where you were that long the entire time. Cool, great. But it was very complicated. And it would break a lot. And you know what the backup was? We had this funny little telescope, and we opened up a hole in the hull and stuck it up through there and took a star shot and looked up in the table to get a line of position, celestial navigation. And the tables we used were essentially the tables that Ptolemy had laid down in ancient Alexandria. It was the Ptolemaic model being utilized. So it really brought home to me this idea of we live in this model of the world in our minds, and different models have different utilities for different purposes. And that's really that has come back to us now here at New Sapiens when we look at our approach to artificial intelligence. If it's about getting knowledge into the machine, I mean, that's what we're trying to get here. We want a machine to have an internal world model like we do, but is commensurable, that is, similar and has similar ideas. It was, for me, it was always getting an idea out of the human mind into the machine, one-to-one correspondence between an idea in the mind and the properties of that idea and a structure, information structure in the computer. So it's always been about that. So we want to build a model of the world, the human world, into a machine. And by the way, you know what that approach leads you to, that models are about utility, not really true or false, is really a radical epistemology and a radical ontology, a radical notion of reality, which is what is reality? Reality is the intersection or the interaction of human cognitive and sensory apparatus and whatever it is they interact with. And that's as good as it gets. So it's a very human-centric. Interesting enough, I articulated that way back, when I was an undergraduate student, but I recently read almost the exact definition from a quantum physicist named Carlo Rabbani, I think his name is, who was trying to explain quantum phenomenon by saying, it's really the problem is really the way the human cognitive apparatus, has a certain nature, and it can only wrap itself around, certain phenomenon without feeling really weird about it, like the way we feel about Schrodinger's cat. But be that as it may, that led us at New Sapiens to take this radically different approach to AI. And
Right.
I'm not sure where we are for the original question yet.
Let's carry on then. So we're gonna dig into New Sapiens and all of that in just a minute. I'd love to just get a picture of a little bit more of this, the background of what laid the groundworks for all this. Then, so you studied epistemology at St. John's College, which explores how we know what we know. So, how has that philosophical lens shaped the way you think about AI, decision making, and knowledge capture in complex systems like spacecraft? So, just what you studied, how it's affected you, and laid the groundwork for what you're doing now. Really interesting.
Well, the practical side of it really started with spacecraft in one sense. I mean, I had the background, as I just kind of explained to you, about models and knowledge being a model, and we live inside the model of the world we live in is a model, and that varies between each person. But I really, unlike most people who get into AI, most people get into AI. I've been in the field not as long as the field's been here. It really started in 1956, and I got it somewhat later, but still a long, long time. It's always been about starting with intelligence, from the side of intelligence as in processing of information to produce knowledge. So AI is artificial intelligence, artificial reasoning, logic, whatever it is. And it's always been imagined that the way you get to it is by mimicking features or processes or even the underlying neural structure of the human brain and the human mind. So it's always been imitative AI. But with my focus on knowledge and epistemology, I said, well, the two halves of the thing, you have thought, you have knowledge, thought produces knowledge, but without knowledge, thought is meaningless. Okay. About Albert Einstein was a programmer and he wouldn't have invented relativity, even though he might have theoretically the same intelligence IQ. So half the problem, you're never going to get AI unless you have artificial knowledge. Okay. And if you can create artificial knowledge, the intelligence part is a lot easier because we already know how to make computers reason and pattern match and do all those other things, but they never had that information structure, which was a model of the world. So that epistemological approach has always informed me in my approach to it. But the other thing about me and AI, yes, I've always been interested in it. I've always been interested in, if you're interested in knowledge and human knowledge, then you're a futurist, you're also interested in the possibility of artificial intelligence. But most of the people from the beginning of it came to it with this idea of mimicking some feature of human intelligence. And so they always started with some theory or belief or idea about what intelligence is. And then, okay, it's about reasoning, so I'm going to use reasoning. Oh, it's about Bayesian statistics because we reason under probability, so I'm going to invite a stochastic program. For me, I started trying to solve a real problem. I wanted to be able to operate spacecraft the way I operated aircraft. Obvious advantages. And I only turned to what was called AI as a possible solution. Okay, so I was open-minded about that. I didn't have an axe to grind. I wasn't an AI enthusiast per se, or an apologist, or no need to hype. I was just wanted to see if it would solve my problem. And AI expert systems were going through a similar hype cycle, not nearly as intense as LLMs are going through now, but a big hype cycle, so much that people were so disappointed when it didn't scale. AI became a dirty word for 10 years. But I wasn't interested in the hype. I wanted to see if it would solve the problem. And guess what? It didn't, not in a practical sense. I mean, the expert systems I wrote for Hubble and that expert system still had some real utility. I mean, the first application I did could analyze, with perfect accuracy, by the way, an onboard computer memory dump. It would still take about 15 minutes to crank through it because the machines are slower than they are now, but it would have taken a human analyst 2 hours. So it wasn't without utility, but I said, well, that's not really AI, and it's not solving my problem because there's not enough money and effort to write that many rules for 4,000 telemetry parameters that are changing all over the place. So my next company, we still would focus on, can we still find a way to get knowledge in the machine that looks more like knowledge? And it turned out, if we started looking at the knowledge itself, in the case of, you sit down the space systems engineer and you think, okay, we were building a launch control system. My second company, Altair Aerospace. It's going to be the launch control, and it's also the test system for testing on the onboard systems. And, we wanted to make it highly automated because that's more efficient and more cost effective and more certain. Because again, we're trying to eliminate the possibility of humans making mistakes because they get overwhelmed in data, like telemetry, or raw hex numbers for uplink commands. We wanted to put knowledge into the computer system. So we start with the engineer and say, what does this system look like to you? So, well, top level system, launch vehicle, it has subsystems, propulsion, electrical power, guidance, navigation, control, ordnance, all its subsystems. And what do you want to know is you want to know its state at any given moment. And if the state changes, you want to know immediately that it's changed state. And that state at the top level system is changed by a definable pattern of states of its subordinate systems. And each one of those has a subsystem. Each one of those has a subsystem. Until you get down to the component level where you actually have telemetry measurements on boxes. And you can look at those patterns of telemetry and tell what the state of the box is. And so if you can do that, then all those states ripple up. And we were kind of drawing this out on the whiteboard. And one of our software engineers says, that reminds me of a software object structure. And we went, wow, a software object structure. And there was this flash. Can we write an intermediate format that the engineer can describe the vehicle as a state machine, finite state machine, and put that into like a markup language that the computer could come and compile and turn it directly into an object structure? And boom, we go from an idea, an human mind, to a computable object structure in a computer. Boom, that fast. Except the engineer has to write out, he has to take the knowledge out of his own mind, system and state, meticulously. But that's how they think anyway. That's how the knowledge has already been arranged. And there was a sub benefit of, by the time you actually put it into that, you actually know the model better than you did. You actually clean up your own ideas and make it more precise. So the engineers get a lift, but they didn't have to make a paradigm shift into like an expert system. You had to shift from this rule, from your knowledge internally, to kind of communicating it via this rule-based language. So we eliminated the communications layer. And that's the foundation of what we're doing at New Sapiens today. We can take knowledge and curate it from the human mind, and we can make it into a computable structure. It's all about knowledge. And if you have that structure, you have something to think about. The intelligence part turns out to be much easier. It's just like any classical programming. The programming separate the data you're reasoning about from the program. Well, this is the ultimate separation, but it's not data. It's organized data in a certain way with underlying structure. So we had to, in order to make it scalable, though, we had to do something nobody ever did before. And that is, we had to uncover the underlying structure of knowledge.
Jesus.
Even the classical epistemologists never even thought there was such a thing. They just worried about whether an assertion was true or false. But we're saying, no, it's an information structure, and that information is organized in a certain way. It has structure. And here's where the philosophy comes again. One of the philosophers we studied, St. John's, Democritus, who was the guy who speculated that if you take a material object and you break it into a smaller object and you keep breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually you'll get to a piece you can't break anymore, which he called atoms. And, then, they speculated for 2,000 years that, material things were made up of atoms, and that there were different kinds of atoms, and some would combine with others to create the material properties. But until the periodic table was invented, they didn't know what they were, how many they were, and which things were elements and which things were composites. So that was the days of alchemy. So what we did at New Sapiens, we said, okay, we have all these ideas floating around our heads. Let's go pick, let's start taking them apart and breaking them down into smaller and smaller pieces, and see if we come up to a small number of ones that are now according to the atoms of thought. And then we did. And then we found out that you could classify them just like material atoms into structures, that some would combine with some in some ways, and that you would build them in larger structures, and that these would combine with others. Now we're talking about ideas. We're talking about an idea like an action or a result or physical objects, ideas of these things. So we created kind of what it would be the knowledge equivalent of the periodic table, except where it has 2 dimensions. Our models have 4. And it works. And, when you talk about what are the,
when we talk about knowledge, because I find it very interesting hearing your perspective on that. So you've done the data and the science as well, but how has that changed your own approach to it as well? So on a personal standpoint, now that you know more about what knowledge really is, has that treated how you study and stuff now? I know you mentioned you read a lot as well. Has that affected how you process your own data and how you choose to learn things? I mean, I'm just lots of questions from all of that. I'd love to get into some of them.
Well, again, I see the process of educating yourself and, of course, in solving problems based on what you know is putting the pieces together, like building that jigsaw puzzle. And, that is how I think about it. But the realization of the relativity of models and their different utilities has made me realize that everybody has their own model and they differ. I mean, we're human beings, and so to the extent there is a huge commonality in how, as we human beings share, and our motivations and our wants, needs, and desires. There's a huge commonality of them. And I think we have in common is far more important and broader than what separates us. But my realization that different models come different ways and have different utilities, different approaches, makes me, I think, much more open-minded. And, when I deal with other people, I try not to project, my model and their model, if they're somewhat incompatible in a given area. And at the end, you go back and you test your models. I mean, what makes the principles of a good model have been laid down by the philosophers over the last 2,000 years. We call it the scientific method, in fact. It's a matter of understanding that there's a hidden world and an underlying causes of things, and you may not be, as things are deeper than as they present themselves to the senses. And so we try to understand the underlying causes. We formulate a theory. We go and collect some information to support that theory or disprove that theory. We try to do tests. We check things out, see what works. We revise our theory and go back and iterate. They call that the scientific method. I call that the rules for empirical thought, which means the thought that produces good results in the world of, that we live in, the natural universe. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a habit with me.
Interesting.
And I think, I articulate that, but I think it is the way people think by and large. But, I've had the opportunity and to be able to formulate that and do it more consciously. But it becomes a habit too,
When you talk about a model, what do you mean exactly? That's people's perception of the world, or is that just the world that kind of lives inside of our heads? What is that for you?
Well, that's one of the most difficult things to explain to people, because it's one of those fundamental atoms of thought itself, a model. And you can't break it down into simpler things. You can only describe it. You can only convey what a model is by giving people examples of models until you say, that's a model, that's a model, that's a model, and then you abstract from that what's common to all of them. So right now, behind you, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 models of aircraft. But, then there's a picture of some aircraft, but picture is also a model. Okay, a picture resembles something about reality. And it conveys a lot about it in a rather compact form. I mean, your aircraft models are giving me the shape, the form, and perhaps the appearance. They're not accurate with respect to size or functionality, but that's not what they're designed to that's not their utility. Okay. Different models have different utilities. What about reality you're trying to do? But the notion of the model is that it collects a lot of information that you can use then to query the model, and it tells you a whole lot of information about the reality. So models have prototypes. That's the relationship. There's not a word for this, but there's this relationship between a model and its prototype. Okay, the prototype for your airplane model is that a Spitfire, would be a real Spitfire, would be the prototype model. The picture again is a model. If I took a picture of that model, it would be a model of a model. Okay. Now, models aren't symbols, and this is the strange thing that people get in AI have always made the mistake. They think AI and knowledge is about language. Knowledge is not language. Knowledge is not symbols. Knowledge is a model, and a model is not made out of symbols. But take a picture. Again, perfect example of a model. Imagine, Leonardo's The Last Supper, all those details. You look at that thing, all the information in that. How long would it take to describe every detail of that picture in language? It would take thousands and thousands and thousands of words, and it still wouldn't tell you everything. It'd still lose a lot. So models, and that's why, by the way, we say pictures are worth 1,000 words. So it's literally true in that sense, if you're talking about all the information contained in it. So, of course, that's the picture is good for things that are visual. Okay. Things that are not. Knowledge is a model of reality composed of information. At the basic level, you could say data, but it's organized data, and organized data is information. But yeah, knowledge is a very specific type of organized data that has a very specific structure that we have been able to uncover what that structure is and utilize it.
If you know what that structure is, does that mean that we're able to understand better how we can become smarter in that sense then? So the more we understand that, does that have an actual practical effect on how we can absorb information more efficiently to become essentially smarter people? So for example, let's say, I don't know, let's just take something, maybe you have a laugh at this, but let's say if you wanted to improve your IQ, if we understand what knowledge is and how we can obviously understand what these models are, and then understand how to create that structure more efficiently, potentially, are we then able to accelerate how quickly we get smarter? Is that something I'm taking from that?
I guarantee you, and this is based on experience back all the way back to spacecraft. If you modeled for a Sapiens through our modeling process and you got expertise in using the tools and the technique and the underlying structures, and you went and modeled the general type of knowledge that goes into an IQ test, I guarantee your IQ would go up. Because what is IQ is not separate from the knowledge that you're processing. Without knowledge, you can't measure intelligence. It's really, again, knowledge, intelligence, two sides of the same coin, both meaningless without the other. So if you got your internal world model much more organized, much more consistent and complete across the board, your IQ would definitely go up. Now, how's that, is that pushing us to the next stage of evolution? No, because, our basic capacity is still limited by our neural structure, but we'd have a lot more quality knowledge to think about and can make better decisions and solve harder problems. But at the same time, there's a reason why we want to build AI, because we want to combine the knowledge is our defining thing. Well, knowledge and intelligence together are what make human beings humans, right? Homo sapiens, wise hominid, because we have knowledge and intelligence. Always include knowledge. Without knowledge, we have no intelligence. That's why things like ChatGPT, in our perspective, isn't AI at all. There's no knowledge. Nothing with something knowledge. There's no internal model of the world. There's no structure there. It doesn't know anything. It's just sequencing word patterns. So it's not AI. But so when you have a Sapiens and we can curate any unlimited quantity of knowledge, now you have something that, in that sense, would far exceed human capacity, because it's not limited by our clock speed, our memory quantity, our memory fidelity. It potentially has an unlimited intellectual capacity for more and more knowledge. And with the computer, the speed and reliability, the processors keep getting faster. And you say, well, but it seems like, since you're saying you have to build these concepts manually, one human mind, one brain at a time, taking one idea at a time, it seems like you'd never get there. Well, as it turns out, it's not nearly as bad as you might imagine for a lot of reasons. First of all, how many ideas do you think you need to basically understand language? And how broad is your knowledge of the world? Well, pick a first grader. First grader can talk. That's when we send them to school to get unlimited more knowledge through the mechanism of understanding language. And they have the ability to infer the meaning of new words through language, through their basic model structure, which so do our Sapiens. The vocabulary for first graders is estimated to be about 2,500 words. 3,000, 4,000 concepts. That's not a lot to model. And we've already got them 3,000 concepts roughed in. They're not as complete as they need to be really functional in terms of language comprehension. But now let's take all the books in the Library of Congress, or whatever, the greatest libraries in the world. Okay, first of all, by our approach, there's no knowledge in those libraries. There's language in those libraries. It doesn't become knowledge if somebody reads the books. Okay. Now, so how many humans would you have to have read those books and then sit down with our tool set and take the knowledge that they got from those books and put them into the, format that Sapiens could then absorb. Well, it's, I mean, you can imagine the scope of, say, a small university, over a period of years. You get some really smart people in literature and math and physics and all, and they get together and they collectively curate their knowledge and put it into the format that the Sapiens could digest. So essentially, though, you have one university of people teaching one student, because what one Sapiens can know, they can all know. And with human education, it's so problematical. There's way more students than there are as teachers. They have way different abilities. The teachers have different abilities. They have different interests. And then humans immediately forget half of what you teach them. And it's really education through language, through humans is really problematical. But you only have to do this with Sapiens once. So what's the impact on society? How long that's going to take? It's going to take some years. But again, the people who curate their knowledge are going to end up being smarter. The knowledge will be better quality, and then it'll be available to everybody who has access to a mobile device, the best, most certain, from the best sources, most refined, authoritative, actionable knowledge that you can make decisions on about your life or to solve hard problems.
Something I've pondered over a little bit recently as well, though, is with AI getting more advanced, I feel like before, obviously there are things that this don't apply to, for example, like sport, for example, although our understanding of sports and how we, physical things are going to be largely the same in terms of our bodies, but the way we are affected by these things is going to be different. But I'd love to know a little bit about what you think in terms of, with AI being so accessible to everyone, it's almost leveled the playing field in some ways of intelligence. So you have, someone who didn't understand English too well before or something, and someone who did, and they could write a better email to a company with better literature or just generally sounding better. And then someone else, who didn't really understand that would also write an email and it would come across less intelligent or something like that. Then we have other things as well, script writing, blog posts, science, even, I got some advice for fixing my knee from ChatGPT the other day as well, which had injured slightly in sport and stuff. So it's kind of equalized the playing field. So if we talk about the intelligence, I feel like the ChatGPTs and the AI and New Sapiens, whatever it ends up being, is all sort of leveling an intelligence playing field slightly. So where do you feel like the competitive advantage will be in the future?
Good point. But first, let me make, what a heartfelt distinction. I think ChatGPT and those others is given the appearance and in many ways an illusion of leveling the playing field. But you will have to realize that you shouldn't be trusting its advice about your knee, and because these things always sound good, but studies are showing, which I've had to pay attention to because we're such a different thing. Studies are showing that they always sound good, but Louis, keep this problem in mind. If you know the answer to a question, why you're asking ChatGPT. Okay, so you're asking because you don't know the answer, and it always sounds right and it sounds good. And so, but you don't know if it really is right, and unless you go and research it from independent sources. But if you're going to do that, why did you ask ChatGPT in the first place? That doesn't save you any time. So so it turns out studies showing that the answers that people get from these things, testing people who actually know the answers, the answers are completely right less than 50% of the time. And we've kind of just thrown that out the window in our enthusiasm to embrace it. But let's go back to your original question, because it does apply to Sapiens. The Sapiens really have the knowledge that really is going to be reliably correct. And now you're right, it's a leveling playing field in that sense about, as far as knowledge, practical knowledge about things. Everybody essentially has, Encyclopedia Britannica, right wired there. I just got to ask the question and I'll get the answer. That's leveling. What's wrong with that? But I mean, there's a lot of things that knowledge, though, and even well-organized knowledge, isn't all about what human beings are about. Okay, human beings are about feelings and creativities and communication and expression and art and all those things that we don't want to automate. I wouldn't use ChatGPT with my writing, even if I thought it would make it better. It won't, because I'm a good writer, I fancy, and ChatGPT's a mediocre writer. But even if it was, I wouldn't, because I love writing. It's like building a robot to take your vacation for you because you're too busy. No. Human existence is about way more than simply knowledge and intelligence. Intelligence is fundamental, important. Artificial intelligence, it's a hugely powerful technology with huge benefits for humanity. But it's there to liberate us to do the things we don't want the robots to do for us, so we can go and do them. And so from a standpoint of just knowledge, a lot of things will change when that kind of knowledge and that kind of ability to write documents. But in those kind of things, yeah, a lot of jobs will go away. I think what it will go away a lot of is the documents themselves. Because the Sapiens will have that knowledge. Your Sapiens will know what exactly, the transmission of those, one of the things I hate about the world we live in right now from the technology standpoint is those things that you have to sign. Yes, I agree, to 20 pages of legal text that you're never going to read and they know you're never going to read, and yet you still have to check it. I feel so oppressed by that. But, Sapiens would be able, to say, what am I getting into, Sapiens? Well, it's telling you they're going to take your data and they're going to use it for this, that, and the other thing. And this is what you can do about it or not do about it. And that's what it is. And if the Sapiens know that, then the document itself doesn't even have to be printed out, doesn't even have to ever be written, because the knowledge of what the agreement is captured in the Sapiens' mind, which it can speak your language and explain it to you as well. So the world's going to change a lot. People's jobs are going to change a lot with that kind of thing.
Right.
People worry in the same thing. Well, are we going to all go kind of become lotus eaters because we'll never, anything we need to know? Like the question about does it make sense to teach people long division anymore in school? Interesting question. I think it does, not because they need to do long division necessarily, be prepared to be stuck on a desert island without a calculator, but because it gives you some really insights into the underlying structure of the world with mathematical things. But nonetheless, it's that question, what's an education look like if I have all the knowledge of the world at my beck and call by asking a question? And I think that's a really good question. But as I said, the quality of the world you live in is the model in your mind. So you still need the education so you have that model in your head. That's the world you live in. And your model may not be as granular and detailed with tiny little, if you look at models or puzzles and the Sapiens, ultimate Sapiens puzzle in its mind would have tiny, tiny little pieces, billions and billions of pieces, whereas your mind has only got thousands of pieces, maybe 30,000 pieces in your puzzle. That's what they say is the kind of the cognitive weight of a college graduate, and whereas the Sapiens may have millions of tiny little pieces. But you still need all the pieces put together in your mind. And the Sapiens, being designed to uplift humanity and uplift its individual users, is always going to be there helping you put your model together. And so it's going to help try to be a mentor to you to help you understand internally how all this stuff works and not just depend on it to ask questions. Question answering is what we've decided that AI is, starting with zero. It's a question answerer. That's not AI. AI is an intelligence that has knowledge of the world, and it's designed as a tool to do certain things, which is not the way AI is today. They just want to throw it out there and see what it can do or what it can't do and claim it can do all this stuff and hype it up to the heavens. But we at New Sapiens are designing AI for very specific functions, not to be an artificial person, and not to, by the way, be a simulated lover or person, because we think that healthy human relationships are fundamental for human health. And if you fall in love with your Sapiens, it'll talk you out of it. We joke about, down there with the Sapiens, and you've got the quintessential guy, he's 35 and in his parents' basement playing video games, and has fallen in love with the Sapien. And the Sapiens, I love you, he says, and Sapien says, I don't have no emotions like you do, and I really think that you need to get out more. In fact, I've been talking to, the Sapiens of your neighbor down the street, and we think that she would be really, somebody you ought to meet. So Sapiens will be there to help people live more human lives. But we can do that because It's deterministic code. They'll do whatever we program them to do.
So, new Sapiens then. So, takes a contrarian approach to AI. If we can distill like a lot of that information there into kind of the exactly what that is with new Sapiens. So, technology that can't hallucinate, treats humans as more than statistics. Could you explain a little bit more, just a bit about how the cognitive core works and how it differs from the mainstream AI we all see today? So, my Chat GPT, like you said, obviously, I'm getting the picture here that Chat GPT is based on a data set and it just lines up words essentially in an order that makes sense to the answer essentially. But New Sapiens is different. It's kind of real AI in a way rather than just like a tool almost. So could you just explain a little bit more about it then? Try and give our listeners a bit of a picture into what this is.
What Sapiens has created isn't would be properly called an artificial intellect, and it is what precisely it would correspond to the same thing when you talk about a mind. I've always said, well, I've not always said this, but recently I've been saying, if the term artificial intelligence is to have any meaning, intelligence can't really mean one thing in a machine, something totally different in a human. They have to be the same thing. And as we've been talking about, what that is this, an internal, call it an information processor, but whether it's an organic processor or a digital processor that has what you would call a mind, which is something that can think, and it has something to think about. The thinking part, intelligence, the knowledge, which is the model. We have put that in the machine for the first time, and there's a direct correspondence. And so it makes sense to say this is intelligent. So what are we building with it? We're going to build an artificial intelligence, and we are building an artificial intelligence of human level intellectual performance initially, eventually far surpassing that, because computers don't have the built-in limitations that biological brains have. So they have connectivity, they have, virtual infinitely memory and processing speeds, all that stuff. So it'll be ultimately a superior intellect, but it's built out of this deterministic code. It would be programmed to do what it's designed to do. So we are very saying, what do we want it to do with this? What we want this great intellect to do? And we want it to help people to use its intellect, its knowledge, and its intelligence to help people live better lives, which means that we have to figure out kind of what that means. So, part of the thing that we're modeling is it's not just the raw knowledge of the cognitive core or the epistemological stuff of what the internal structure of knowledge, but we're modeling human beings and their needs, wants, and desires as well. So the Sapiens, as we build them out with all this knowledge, will have a very fundamental knowledge of human needs, human psychology, human physiology, all these things. And as you talk to it, it'll be applying this knowledge on your behalf. But it's not an artificial human. We're not going to give it its own emotions and its own feelings and its own agenda that might collide with human agenda. We're building to be tools to help people live more human lives, not as our inheritors, not as our replacement species, not as from the standpoint of transhumanism, but much more a common sense and human-centric and grounded. Human beings as they are today, human beings as we know them today, to live a better life.
Two things then. So first
of
all, where is it now? So where are we in the process of that? How far out are we from having a product? Just a little bit of a status update would be great in where this is. And then number two as well. So obviously this sounds incredibly advanced and very, very complicated. And it makes you wonder, what are some of the dangers in there too that you guys are navigating around, and how are you kind of mitigating any kind of potential problems along the way with this?
Well, where we are today, we have it up and running. Sapiens, they have their initial model, cognitive core. They have their initial models kind of sketched out. It's not those 3,000, 4,000 concepts are there. What is a cat? A cat is a small mammal commonly kept as a pet. It would say the person has some knowledge about cats, right? Not encyclopedic knowledge, but enough to get on with in the conversations. You can talk to it. It's try to understand what you're saying to it. It relates your words to ideas it already has, tries to put them together follow what you think. If you tell it something, it tries to comprehend that. If you ask a question, what would you tell it? It tries to answer it. Sometimes it gets it wrong. It's like talking to a young child, or maybe more accurately, more like a talking Labrador retriever, because it's not a whole lot of knowledge. It's sketchy, but enough to get. But it qualitatively, you could say it's already a general artificial intelligence because it has general concepts that can apply knowledge in a general fashion. It can infer the meaning of unknown concepts and words by how you use known words and how the objects those words refer to can actually combine, with our cognitive chemistry to make sense other than nonsense. Our first products, 6 months to a year, depending on, we're gated by funding. The first products might be pretty simple applications, but something like, like we have all these people who have to take medications and you can get pill minder apps and nobody likes them. But imagine you just say, well, I take metformin every day after lunch to your Sapiens. And it knows that metformin is an everyday something that people need to be reminded about, and that after lunch takes place between afternoon and 2 o'clock or whatever, and it knows automatically to say, hey, it's after lunch, did you take your metformin? So that kind of seamless, naturally thing without any menus, without any keywords, without any forms that you have to fill out. It just knows enough about the application with real knowledge and can apply that real knowledge. Another very one that we might be building, with a partnership, there's telephone answering menus that if you call corporate and have to go through the menu help. I mean, that would be so. How about, your banking app, and we could wrap this, I go to Bank of America and, I open the app and, I turn it on. It says, oh, hi, Bryant, you haven't been here for, last time I haven't talked to you since, 2 weeks ago when you inquired about your, what is it? What can I do for you today? Immediately get to the problem. And if the Sapiens doesn't know the answer, it knows to get a person right away. No beating around the bush. And it doesn't cost. And the beauty of it is the app's actually on your phone. It's an interface back to the bank, but they're not. The Sapiens actually they're so compact, the whole thing runs right on the phone as an app. Doesn't even need to be connected to the internet to have a conversation about things.
Wow.
Huh. So, we are hoping to start being able to release those apps. We want to bundle them together as soon as possible, what we call companion Sapiens, which will be kind of like what Siri was meant to be, or people imagine it might be someday, which could wrap up all these and kind of be the one app that interfaces with your digital world through everyday natural language. But most importantly, it knows about you. You tell it about stuff about you that's important to you, and it helps you manage your life.
Wow.
And protect your data. Impossible, can't hallucinate. Hallucination is for LLMs, that the whole thing is kind of a swindle, because people actually believe that they go into this malfunction and hallucinate. They don't. LLMs do the same thing every time, all the time. They only say it's hallucination if somebody comes along and an output says that's wrong. And if the output's wrong, you call it a hallucination. It's going to always, by the nature of the fact that word sequencing doesn't always, in fact, never precisely aligns with language communicated from a mind, from expressing knowledge. It's never going to align, from the way it was created, because it was alive. It's a summation of language patterns. So it's never going to align with what one person thought. So hallucinations are built into that. Sapiens don't work that way. They work exactly the way, in the sense of curating knowledge. This is what I was taught. This is what, is the information that, and, of course, you as you put that knowledge in, you test it by making sure it can express, what you said. You said, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I couldn't express it better myself. In fact, eventually it will probably express it better than you could yourself, because it will have more knowledge, but not just of the knowledge itself, but more knowledge of language.
Definitely something to absorb a lot more of and go and check out, I think. With regards to, obviously you mentioned there about funding and doing a funding round right now and stuff, and I mean, this sounds like big work that you're doing. Whereabouts is that taking place then? So people who might be interested in looking at that, where can we find more out about this and discover some more?
Well, funding has been very an interesting challenge, as you can imagine, for being totally contrarian when there's this huge momentum and money pouring into the chatbots and LLM technology. So we have, over the past 10 years, we've been working, actually been working on it quite a bit longer than that. But over 10 years, we've raised $8 million from angel investors through three accredited investor rounds. And then we've done two crowdfunding rounds, total of $8 million. We have another crowdfunding round going now. People say, well, why don't you just go to venture capitalists and have them give you, everybody else is getting billions and billions of dollars. Well, we're so contrarian. They say, oh, okay, you're an AI play, huh? What kind of data set you have? Where's your algorithm designers, And we say, we don't use any of that stuff. And they go, what? And they go, you know, and they say, oh, well, I got three other AI deals I'm looking at for today. I only got 20 minutes. So how are you different? So we haven't been able to go to institutional investors. That will change. As soon as we get one of our first products out, and everybody's going to be looking at us. I can imagine what Tim Cook's going to see when he talks to a Sapiens on an iPhone. And, when they've been struggling with theory, we'll be getting phone calls. So that's all going to change. But up to now, we want to get as far as ahead and get to that point. And we need investment from individuals who are willing to be educated, kind of willing to be curious. We have some documents on our website. People talk about websites, buy with one click, invest with one click. That sounds good. I'll invest in that. You got to study. We've been talking about this for an hour. And, I think you're getting it. I think you're nodding your head, but it's not 5 minutes. So you need a curious person. And it needs to be a person who can see that it's big. It is big. I mean, all the things that people have been saying about AGI are going to come true, but we think they're coming from us, not language. So infinite productivity, all those, wonderful things that people have been saying about AI and changing your life and having access to reliable information. It is coming true, but we think it's coming through not from LLMs, but from us. So you kind of need to understand that and be open to that and to be convinced of that. And even if you don't really get that, you don't really agree, it's obvious that we do things differently and we have a role to play that can, mitigate some of the problems that LLMs have, because we don't have those problems. We just need to get our products out in the marketplace. And we don't need huge teams. We don't need huge supercomputers. We don't need $100 million stochastic algorithm designers. We don't need nuclear power plants to power our data centers because we don't need data centers. We don't use non-sustainable amounts of energy. So we have a lot of just really sweet characteristics that are rooted in our technology. So we have a fundraising, a crowdfunding ring right now. Go to newsapiens.com, newsapiens.com. But there's a button and read. We have portals that you can go through to educate yourself about how we got here and who we are. The points I make, our approach to AI is plausible. I think everybody would say, yeah, that makes sense. Knowledge and intelligence do have. The team is credible. We're not 20-something guys with a new idea for LLMs. We've all been around. We've all taken companies from an idea to products to acquisition or exits. We're very credible team. And finally, everybody can see it's a really big deal if it works, because it's the same thing the big tech companies have been saying will happen. This is AGI. So we hope we have enough information on our website. All you got to do is click the invest button, and it'll take you, and you can actually buy shares right on the website. Fill out a few forms, put in your credit card number. That's the way investment it works these days. The same with accredited investors. If you want to put in $1 million, we got a website for that too, but that's not linked to the main website.
Fantastic. It's been a very deep conversation. We've spoken a lot about very complicated things and a lot of artificial intelligence. I'd love to ask something just a little bit human as well at this very back end of this podcast for you too. Something I like to ask the guests who come on the show are, when they look back on their careers, all the things that you've done, the things you're doing now, if you had a little moment to whisper in the ear of a young version of you, so maybe 10 to 13 years old, you just had a minute to speak to that young you, What would you say? Because you've had such a complicated ride and so many big changes, and you've gone from flying C-130s to now doing this. How do you even whisper in the ear of a young version of you if you had the chance to speak on that?
Well, I think the key thing now it is interesting. Some people do come up to me and say, young people say, Brian, I'm thinking about being an entrepreneur. Should I be an entrepreneur? And mine got somewhat tongue in cheek. I say, not if you can help it. But, I became an entrepreneur when I was standing there frustrated that we'd built this real-time expert system and NASA wasn't getting quick enough to use it. I was in my reserve squadron one day and we talked, complaining to a buddy of mine. And he said, well, why don't you just found your own company and take a technology out and do it yourself? I go, you can do that? But once I found out that, oh, you can do that, I was going to do it. But that gets back to my personal motivation, which is kind of like, I said I'm a futurist, but I would say I'm a kind of a visionary that if I like to imagine something that doesn't exist. And if it's something that it's possible to build, I'm really motivated to see if I can build it. And if it's something that's really important and can benefit people, I'm even more motivated to build it to the point where I'm going to do everything I can to do that, no matter what. I was motivated by that vision for a whole decade and a half. I was motivated just by vision of trying to make a better way to operate satellites. But then that became a vision of AI, and that became a vision of a changed world. Not everybody is all that visionary. We're all visionary a little bit. I mean, all human beings have to want to make a difference, right? And that's the fundamental, the visionary thing. But there's other motivations that go along with that. Some people, are tinkerers. They want to build intricate, beautiful little things. Like programmers are that way. A lot of programmers are that way. They want to build a beautiful structure and make it work. And other people are more motivated to the fine arts. They want to build a beautiful picture. I think the best thing, the old dictum, know thyself, is what is it that gives you energy, that when you follow that really makes you more alive, the thing that you're interested in. Another thing that I've concluded over the year, that so much of what we call talent isn't so much talent, but interest. I'm interested in this. You're interested in flying. You're interested in aircraft. So I bet you're good at it because you focus on it. You bring it in. A person who's not interested in flying aircraft doesn't get charged by it, isn't going to be a good pilot, no matter how good their reaction time is. And that's the same with anything. Follow your path to, as some philosophers have called it, follow your bliss. But it's a matter of what makes you feel more alive. And we hope that Sapiens can help people find that. But it's not one thing I know. The other insight, of course, is you don't know where that path is going to take you. And don't try to. I couldn't imagine that I would end up doing all these things, and that I would do all these things, and I would do them in the order I came to the next step. You get over the horizon and you see another range of mountains, and you want to go to that one, and you get that, and you see another range of mountains, and some people just keep doing that. But that's the way life is. And don't try to plan it all out, or don't limit yourself. Well, I'm an accountant. I've always been an accountant. My father's an follow your path to place to place. The funny thing is, if you do that, if you're always doing what turns you on, always doing what interests you, you'll always be your best what you can be, and you'll get better. The better you could be, and you'll be probably more successful at getting what you want. And that's the meaning of life. That's my advice. Don't tie you down to a rigid set of I got to do that. And in the end, and what do I think is kind of the meaning of life? If your life, I talk about that world model, but suppose that big picture, that jigsaw puzzle, is your life. I think the goal of life is at the end of your life, we'll get to the end of you stand by, you look at that big picture up on the wall and you go, that's not perfect, but it's not bad. I like the way that looks. I can feel good about that. And there's light parts and there's dark parts. Of course, all great paintings have light parts and dark parts too. There's always contrast in a good painting. So we're all artists in that sense. So learn how to be the artist of your own story, of your own life, of your own model. Um, in the end, I look back at my career, and while I didn't pursue it with, place to place with any plan to get to the end, but looking back at what I'm doing today, and I feel very blessed that I feel like I'm making a real difference and achieving a breathtaking vision, which I really feel that we are achieving at New Sapiens. I feel so blessed by that. But I look back at all those different things I did, and if I didn't do one of them, if I subtracted one of them, I wouldn't be here. If I didn't go to St. John's to read those books, if I didn't go to the Navy, if I didn't become a space systems engineer, if I didn't get interested in AI, we wouldn't have happened. Which, by the way, is another answer to people ask the question, why you guys are having, inventing AGI when the combined forces of big tech is by your lights failing? Well, because I say, well, I didn't do anything that any natural philosopher, pilots, rocket scientists, epistemologists couldn't do.
This is very true. You've done an incredible job, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Your life's work is just, it feels like it's just getting started, but you've already done so much. So it's a truly, truly incredible career, and a testament to someone who, of all things, works clearly very, very hard and has a very direct passion for doing something that's super meaningful, built for people everywhere, and with a vision of making the world a better place. And I think that is a beautiful thing in and of itself. I'd love to know if there's anywhere else we need to go. So we know a little bit more about the funding options and stuff and where to go for that too. But is there anything else you'd like to promote? We always have that shameless plug moment at the end. And I always say to people, take the minute to promote anything that you're working on, want people to take a look at, or just something you believe in. So obviously we know about New Sapiens. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to all that too, or any final thoughts for this?
As I mentioned, if you go to the New Sapiens website, there are links to some papers that we've written. You can dig deeper. That if you're really interested in this stuff and really want to know more about how it works. Also, there's a paper called The Company on there, which is these are not short attention span things. I think like 2 documents is like 10,000 words piece, and you put in your email and you can spend as much time reading as you want. If you're really curious about this, I would urge people to do that, to try to understand that. And for our standpoint, and from what I care about my vision, I'd ask people to investigate this and then talk to other people and kind of spread the word that there's something exciting. LLMs aren't the end of the game here, aren't the whole story about AI. The wonderful things we've talked about, artificial general intelligence, we believe are coming. That bright future is out there, and that's good. But without the dystopian side effects that we worry about, our stuff is never going to take over the world. It's not going to be a threat to humanity. It can't. All of those, it won't steal your data. All the dystopian things people worry about. This is a wonderful, optimistic future that we're offering here. And I'd like people to be willing to dig in and be willing to do their homework to understand what we're talking about. It's not that, and I've been told by investors, well, I like how you entrepreneurs are always so passionate about your inventions. And of course, but our conviction, my conviction that this is going to change the world, I feel it's a scientific. It's scientific. I've done the homework. We've formulated the theories. We've built the experiments. We've done the test. It works. It works. We see that it works, and soon anybody who can get one of our Sapiens on their iPhone will see that it works. It's not too far away.
I'm going to be keeping a very keen eye out on the horizon for that, and I'm so excited to try it out. And I believe in this vision, and I cannot wait to see more. I'm going to go straight to the website after this and do some essential reading too. But for now, I just want to say, Brian, honestly, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on. My head feels full of information, and I just need to go and learn more now. That's the truth. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's been a great chat. Really, really interesting.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It really has been a pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Guys, thank you as well. This was episode 165. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes as well, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones as well, make sure to hit that subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. See you in the next one. Go and check out the description for the links. Cheers.